Friday the 13th for the Nintendo Entertainment System is one of the most intriguing licensed games of the late 80s. Released in 1989, this game was developed by Atlus and published by LJN, a company notorious for turning popular movie franchises into video games. While Friday the 13th wasn't a critical darling, it has since gained a cult following for its quirky, often frustrating gameplay, and for how it attempted to recreate the horror and suspense of the movies on an 8-bit console. During the late 80s, movie-to-game adaptations were increasingly common. LJN, already known for producing games based on licensed properties, partnered with Atlus to develop a game based on the iconic Friday the 13th horror franchise. Atlus had some creative leeway with the project, though limitations in the NES's graphics and sound meant they had to make significant adaptations to bring the tense, graphic horror of the movies to an 8-bit experience suitable for all ages. Atlus was faced with the challenge of creating a game that could capture the feel of the movies without the intense gore and violence. To maintain the atmosphere of suspense, they instead focused on building a tense, survival-based gameplay experience that emphasized atmosphere over jump scares. Given the NES's restrictions, it was a significant task, and they opted for a unique mix of action, survival horror, and role-playing mechanics. Their goal was to give players the experience of surviving against a relentless enemy in Jason Voorhees while managing limited resources and rescuing children. The game's plot is straightforward, based on the central premise of the Friday the 13th movies. The player controls a group of 6 camp counselors tasked with protecting the children at Camp Crystal Lake from the ruthless Jason Voorhees. Jason is determined to kill, and it's up to the counselors to survive, locate him, and eventually defeat him. In the game, Jason relentlessly stalks the camp, making random attacks on the counselors or the cabins housing children. This constant threat adds a level of suspense and urgency that aligns with the movie's tone. Though there are no direct story arcs for each character, players get to know the 6 counselors through their unique strengths and weaknesses. Each counselor has different attributes, such as speed, strength, and jumping ability, which affect their survival skills and combat effectiveness against Jason and other enemies. The player must switch between counselors to manage attacks, heal others, and maximize each character's abilities to survive Jason's onslaught. The gameplay was a departure from many conventional action games of the time. Instead of a linear progression, it's a mix of open-world exploration and survival mechanics, requiring players to juggle multiple tasks in real time to survive and protect the children from Jason. Multiple playable characters? Players control 6 camp counselors, each with unique attributes. These characters can be switched at will, allowing players to move from one location to another quickly. Since each counselor has varying skills, such as speed or strength, selecting the right character for different tasks is crucial for survival. The game's day-night cycle plays a significant role. During the night, Jason becomes more aggressive and powerful, requiring players to be more cautious. The nighttime segments add to the game's suspense, as it becomes harder to see where Jason might strike next. Players start with limited weapons, such as rocks, which are weak and inaccurate. However, by exploring the camp, they can find better weapons like knives, torches, and axes. Combat with Jason happens in 2 forms. First, when he randomly attacks the counselors while they explore, and second, during forced encounters in the cabins. These battles take place in a first-person perspective, where players dodge his attacks while trying to strike back. In addition to fighting Jason, players must manage supplies and rescue children who are at constant risk. Players must navigate the cabins and forests to find health items and weapons while protecting the children in other areas, creating a tense balancing act between offense and defense. One of the game's most memorable mechanics is the random, unpredictable attacks by Jason. He can appear anywhere at almost any time, keeping players constantly on edge. An alarm system notifies players if Jason is attacking a child's cabin, prompting them to rush there before it's too late. This unpredictable threat simulates the horror experience of being pursued by a relentless killer. The objective is to survive and defeat Jason 3 times over 3 in-game days. Each time Jason is defeated, he comes back stronger, with more difficult and frequent attacks. To truly win, players must anticipate his patterns, level up their characters, and make use of the limited resources effectively. Defeating him for the 3rd time ends the game, though few players manage to reach this point due to the difficulty level. Upon its release, Friday the 13th received heavy criticism for its confusing map system, high difficulty, and unconventional gameplay. Many players found the mechanics frustrating and obtuse, and the graphics were seen as simplistic even for the NES. However, as the years have passed, the game has gained a cult following, with fans appreciating its tense atmosphere and challenging mechanics. The random encounters with Jason and the necessity to switch characters have been re-evaluated as inventive design choices that were ahead of their time. It is often considered one of the most challenging NES games. The random encounters with Jason, combined with the time-sensitive nature of rescuing children and the limited resources, make the game an intense experience. Many players were unable to complete it due to its high difficulty curve, earning it a place among notoriously tough NES titles. Fans often joke about Jason's unusual color scheme in the game, where he wears a purple outfit with a blue mask, a departure from his typical movie look. This color choice was likely due to the NES's limited color palette, but it has since become iconic in its own right. In fact, this look for Jason has been celebrated and parodied, even inspiring a retro-inspired DLC skin for Jason in Friday the 13th, the game, 2017, as a nod to fans of the NES game. The cabin battles with Jason are unique for the NES era, using a first-person perspective that was rare in action games at the time. This perspective heightened the tension of encounters with Jason, as players had to dodge and counter his attacks up close. This gameplay mechanic influenced other horror and action games that experimented with mixed perspectives to add variety to gameplay. While horror games are now a well-established genre, Friday the 13th was among the first to attempt a horror experience on a home console. Despite its flaws, it managed to create an atmosphere of suspense and fear on the NES, inspiring future horror games to incorporate similar survival mechanics and atmosphere-focused designs. Some reports suggest that Alice wanted to make a more conventional action game, but LJN pushed for a more survival-oriented experience to better capture the essence of the Friday the 13th movies. This creative difference resulted in the hybrid gameplay style we see, with elements of exploration, action, and survival mechanics blended together in an experimental mix. Friday the 13th for the NES may not have been a blockbuster hit, but it's a fascinating part of video game history. Atlus and LJN took a risk in trying to adapt a horror movie series into a game that blended survival horror, resource management, and action elements on an 8-bit console. Though initially criticized for its difficulty and obscure mechanics, the game has earned a special place in retro gaming culture, celebrated for its ambitious design and distinctive atmosphere. Despite its unconventional gameplay, or perhaps because of it, the game has become a classic among fans who appreciate its unique approach to survival horror. Today, Friday the 13th stands as a reminder of the experimental nature of early licensed games and the lengths developers went to in creating memorable experiences within the limitations of 8-bit hardware. Whether viewed as a hidden gem or a frustrating challenge, it's a game that captured the horror of Jason Voorhees in a way that no other game has quite replicated.